What we need to do is some burning and dodging. Tons of ways to burn and dodge. And let's go with this version of it. We kind of have this version or we have this version. They're both cool. To burn and dodge, we can use curves or levels or just painting in. So let's look at how that works. So new layer, and I'm going to go ahead and call this layer, just call it brighten, because that's really what we're doing if you aren't familiar with the burn and dodge terms. And if I grab my brush tool, and if I have white, and I'm going to make a silly adjustment at first so you can see what's happening here. Painting with a brush with 0% hardness, big, huge brush. You can access this dialog here by control-clicking on the image. Other ways to change your brushes too, but when I paint across this, I have this big, bright white patch on the image. When we take our blending mode to soft light, what that patch does is it turns into something that you could kind of see I could use if I painted it incorrectly to brighten up parts of the image. If we paint with black, which I'll do here, we're going to see that that's going to darken. This would not be very nice to do to our friend Patricia, right? So we have the ability to brighten or darken different areas of the photograph by painting with black or white when the layers blending mode is on soft light. And one more shortcut for you, which might be this. We create a new layer. Maybe we name this. We know we're going to do some burning and dodging. And then we want to convert this to soft light the fast way. We want to be uber fast in our Photoshop work. That is, make sure you have the Move tool selected, or not one of your brushes. Press Shift, Option, F. And that's Shift Alt F on Windows, and that's a shortcut to get there. Soft light's the most commonly used blending mode for photographers, so I think that's why I threw that one in there. And there was a question.
Yeah, what's the difference, or what are your preferences on doing this on a blank layer as opposed to a 50% gray layer?
Yeah, if you do it on 50% gray, the main advantage is you could use the actual burn and dodge tool, and it would either darken or brighten that layer. But if you use burn or dodge tool on nothing, it doesn't happen, right? So if you like using those tools, that's a great way to do it. So, and if you aren't familiar with that, and I'll run with that because I imagine some people aren't, I'm going to hit Shift-Command-N to create a new layer, Shift-Control-N on Windows. This opens up the dialog here, and what we can do, well actually let me just do it kind of maybe old-fashioned. No shortcuts, let's keep it simple. New layer. If we go to our color picker, and if we choose 50% gray, let me just type it in, what am I, with no color in it, and we fill that with 50% gray. Lots of ways to fill it. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. If you want to fill with something, what we can do is choose 50% gray from our fill dialog. That might be even easier. If you're thrown off by what I just did, I guess because I wasn't thinking through it, you could create a new layer and go to Edit and Fill, and then choose 50% gray. That's probably the easiest way, if you aren't familiar with this technique, to do that. On this new layer, when you take the blending mode to soft light, nothing happens because this layer has nothing on it. Soft light, the blending mode, middle gray doesn't affect it, and but it affects our deeper tones and our brighter tones. So, on this layer, we have choices. We can do something like I could paint with white here, and I still am getting my brightening effect, right? White's too high of opacity, but I could go in here and find my shadows and kind of get rid of those as I'm doing here, progressively building up more brightness. You can see how that's starting to deal with those, albeit those aren't great adjustments, but you're getting the idea. I'll do some better ones in a second. Or we could use our burn and dodge tool. And so with the dodge tool, what we can do then is we can start to find those areas where it's too dark. And you can see I'm just kind of getting rid of my shadows here piece by piece. Again, my setting's a little too high, but hopefully you're seeing that what's happening here is I am changing the tonality of that layer. I can do that in the bright way or the dark way. So that just gives you that flexibility. And it's a great way to burn and dodge. I think using curves with a mask is a good way to do it too. So lots of ways to do the same thing. Is there one way which is the best way? I always mistrust when people tell me that because I always find that there's many ways to do it. And I've worked with enough people in Photoshop to find some people love their ways. And if you love a way, do it. What way do you like, by the way?
I usually do the 50% gray.
Yeah, but do you use the burn and dodge tool or do you use the paintbrush?
I use the brush tool.
Okay, great. And she's an amazing retoucher, so there's something to be said for that. So with this one, brush tool, we're back to it. We lower opacity. When we're working with light, it's below 50% at least. We're gonna paint bright white in here. Blending mode goes to soft light, which we can go via the menu, or if we wanna be really advanced user, we have to exit the brush tool for a second, because if I press my soft light shortcut, it'll change my brush blending. I want to change layer blending. Shift Option F or Shift Alt F. If you hate shortcuts, pretend I didn't say that, and just click on this right here. And then what we'll do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to start to try to get rid of the shadows. This kind of work is something where you really, I don't know, I like to listen to cello music when I burn and dodge for some reason, because I think cello music, it just resonates with me. But you want to kind of have this really light touch here as you're doing this, so that you're kind of getting rid of shadows slowly. You're not necessarily burning a hole in the image and all of a sudden there's this huge horrible white spot. And so again, I'm just going to go through and try to find those shadows where I want to diminish them a little bit. Using a Wacom tablet, really helpful. And while we're here too, I'm going to tap the left bracket key to make my brush smaller, and I'm just going to try to bring a little bit of light into the eyes as well. So I'm just going to go to the brighter side of the eye. It should be brighter on the opposite side of the light source. And this is, again, that kind of light that I like so much. You can find it anywhere. It's really flexible. So you get where I'm going with it, right? And that's a fun way to do that. Also feel free, though, to use some of those other techniques. Last one to think about is with curves. If we want to create a curve where we're brightening and bringing up shadows, we might set a couple points here where, you know, kind of removing contrast too. So I'm bringing up my black point on that mask, invert it with the brush tool. Now when I paint with white here, go a little bit faster on this version, what I'm doing is I'm bringing in this adjustment here into these areas, and because it's already scaled back, it looks like I need a higher opacity. It's another way to change opacity on your brush rather than going up there. Number keys, right? 5 goes to 50, 55 is 2 5s, you know, so you can jump around and you can get to these different values here. And what I'm doing is with these adjustments, you can start to see I'm looking to bring in brightness to these areas. The nice thing about working with a mask, let me make the image look bad for a second to illustrate, is if you have identifiable brush strokes, as I do, kind of poor Patricia, and I'm glad she's a good friend if she's watching this. And with this, we have the feather slider. And the feather slider, I think of as kind of the poor man's Wacom tablet, because what you can do is you can bring it up and just soften those edges. So even with these really bad brush strokes, you're going to start to see once I get to a certain spot, they're going to almost look okay. I mean, from like really, really bad to almost, that's almost like usable if I lowered my opacity, right? And yeah, that's usable. And I was just, you know, craziness with the value that we had there. So that being said, the advantage of doing something other than like the technique we talked about before with maybe your brush stroke is this one, you have that built-in feather slider. And I find with light, a little bit of softness on those edges goes a long way, especially in black and white. Any questions that we should get from you guys or from anyone else? If not, I have plenty more to get into. But
so, question from Photomaker.
Yes.
If we want a glamour glow effect on a color portrait, is it a good idea to do black and white processing and then reduce the opacity to gently bring back color? Have you
So let me see.
done that?
So glamour glow.
Yeah.
And I will do something like that in my course later today, not to
cool.
pitch that too much. But
No, that's great.
Glamour glow. But yes, I think getting into, I mean, without, it would be interesting dialogue to have, but without knowing exactly where that's going, what you can do, and I have no idea if this is going to work on this image, so let's just try it real quick. What you can do is just begin to think about how what we were doing with our sliders in black and white was we were, you know, trying to brighten and darken different tones. This is a really great way to work on skin tones And what you can do is take your blending mode to luminosity. This won't look great right here, but what you could see is if I kind of had retouched this and you wanted to go with a really pale porcelain type of skin, which is sometimes you do, or more of a glowing type thing, the color here looks really bad, so I'd have to go in and maybe kill some of my reds. And you'll have to forgive me because this isn't the right file to do this on, but you can kind of see how this thing is giving me a little bit of that glow. So yes, there are ways to do that, but I shouldn't even have gone there, but because I'm going to go there later and we'll do a real process in
and
that.
That's in your other class?
Yes, in my other class. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Are you going to be, another question is, are you going to be talking about plugins?
I'm not, no. I use plugins a ton, and Nik Color Effects Pro is amazing. The thing that I like to do with black and white, especially my students when I'm in a classroom and I have a long time with them, is to hold them off from plugins. And the reason is it's sort of like, I don't know, baking a cake from scratch versus the box, and not that that's bad. Like, eventually you use as many tools as you can, and that's amazing. But my strategy here is to try to do that. But what I've done courses where they're all plugins, and I love those. But that's probably for another day. So I think it's a really valuable, wonderful tool out there. Lots of wonderful tools out there. So yeah.
And one more before we keep going. This question gets asked a lot. This one is from Scott. Can you tell us again about the difference between using opacity versus using fill?
Opacity versus. Wait, let me think of that. So what's the context? Maybe you guys help me out.
Why change the opacity rather than change the fill?
Oh, in Photoshop. Yeah, sorry, I was in Lightroom.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let's do it this way. This is a great way to kind of illustrate this. Patricia here. And what I'm going to do with Patricia is I'll throw on a brushstroke around it, and I'm going to try to throw on a brushstroke that's really noticeable, so I'm not trying to create art, but I'm trying to create something that illustrates these two, which is a really good question. So what we have is with this layer, we have the text, and then we have something around the text. So if I remove the fill from this one, what I'm removing are the pixels on the layer. And the fill is like the stuff, and then the opacity, if I were to remove that, it would be both, right? So it's both the brushstroke and the image. So most often you're going to be working with opacity unless it's in those sort of special effect type of scenarios.
Cool.
So I hope that answered it. Yeah. Cool. Let's do one more image. Okay, Rodney Smith is an amazing photographer, one of my kind of heroes and mentors and stuff. And he does a lot of black and white work. And so with this image, I want to convert a black and white image, and I want it to have a lot of density, and I want to start to think about the photograph. Because remember I was saying, why do black and white? The color in this image, you guys can't see that, so let me zoom in. The color in this image, let's get out of there. The color in this image, I think, is a little bit confusing. I could correct his skin tones to look a little bit better, but I think the eye doesn't really know where to look, and so I want to simplify and deepen, and so that's my goal. So before I get to anything, I'm going to crop this, and I'm going to freeform crop it, which means I'm not constraining my proportions, and the reason I'm doing that is because I just want to kind of go for it, rather than have a certain aspect ratio. The A key is the shortcut to lock and unlock the aspect ratio. Think A for aspect ratio. So crop that. A couple ways to apply the crop. You can double click inside of the middle of that area. You can press return on a Mac, enter on Windows, or you can also just hit done there. So once I've cropped it out, I then also want to think about really what I want is probably the door to disappear, the background to change, so I might even crop it some more. With black and white, you kind of have to see through to what the brightness values will be. Then to get myself started after some of those basic things, I hit the V key, and that gives me at least a good start. Basic panel. We know that we need some more brightness. And what tends to happen, I think, with a lot of our sliders is that we try to figure out how to use them in unison. And they created these, I think, in this order for a reason, that we jump through these, make adjustments in one area, and then kind of jump to another. So I think the image is looking okay, at least on my monitor. Highlights is going to reduce a little bit of my contrast, which is good. Build a touch of that back. Okay. Problem is his eyes are dark, and got to get rid of this stuff. So I hit the K key for the adjustment brush. As a side note, the funniest thing I think about the adjustment brush is, you know how you can open up your panels here? Sorry, my cursor isn't working. It's the only tool that grows. You know, so it like gets super long. I don't know why I think that's so funny. It's like, whoa, a huge adjustment brush. And then it like, oh, there it is. It's kind of small. But anyhow, so I have my adjustment brush, and maybe I can do some exposure and some shadow work. And I want to zoom in further to get into the eyes. Eyes and portraits are really, really important to me. And because I am mostly natural light, what happens to eyes is you get shadows. So with the adjustment brush, a touch of exposure, a lot of shadows. More shadows than exposure, because that's what I want to fix. And so with that, we're going to go down to our values here, size, feather, and flow. And flow in Lightroom is how quickly the adjustment takes place. Density is intensity. So what density does, it's kind of a governor on everything. So if you had a really high exposure, and I'm just going to take my flow up for a second, and I made an adjustment here that turned that white. If I brought my flow down to a low value, I could still get to that bright as white if I just went back and forth a ton. See how that's happening? I've matched that. But once I bring density down, I'm never going to get that high. It doesn't matter how far I go back. It's only going to get as high as 16 on my density slider. So that's sort of it's like a governor. You know, some people like using that. I don't. I keep it all the way up and just work with flow. I find that makes a little more sense to me. All right, so with this, a lot of times we're going to make multiple adjustments here, and so I'm just going to start to try to get out my shadows. I think this kind of detail work isn't always the most exciting to see someone do, but because really, you know, it's like, well, how does someone good at burning and dodging? They're patient, and they work around the image. So if they're working on shadows on the eyes, they also have to work on the shadow under the nose, the shadows by the eyebrows, and you know, you're kind of working around all of those things. Just exaggerate for a moment, bring that up. You can kind of see what I'm trying to do there, bring out some of that light. And often what will happen is with the adjustment brush, we'll want to do multiple adjustments. Here's a great way to do that. Hit the K key once and then K key again. That closes and opens it. It's the really fastest way, because I'll make a ton of adjustments with this tool. Rather than going up here and going new, and then doing something else, K to close, K to open is essentially new. But it's just a real quick, there I am. So with this one, I want to build on top of that. And the reason why you might want to build on top of that is I'm not sure with this one if I'm going to go too far with that. And overlays are kind of too much for me, and so I'm hitting the H key, right, to get rid of those. All right, so working on our shadows and kind of improving those. One more little tip here. Or two more tips. We can look at our before and after. I know that's subtle, but black and white's all about subtlety. Question, yeah.
Yeah, you were just talking about using the K key.
Yeah.
I don't use Lightroom. I use Adobe Camera Raw.
Right.
Will that work in that as well? Because it really frustrates me that I can't.
Yes.
Everything is always adding, never new.
Yeah, I don't want to go to Camera Raw because it wasn't working, but it's a great question. What you can do there is, and I'm blanking on the shortcut for the adjustment brush in Adobe Camera Raw right now, but Z for zoom key and then go back to it, whatever it is. Does anyone remember it? Maybe someone in the chat room will. I forgot it. But so that's kind of the way to work around that. Lightroom, it's just one keyboard shortcut in Camera Raw. What I tend to do is two. I'll just hit zoom and then I'll go back to whatever that key is I've forgotten. I'm sure none of you forget your shortcuts. That's funny. Sometimes I have to watch my own tutorial videos, which is really funny because I'm like, I don't know how I did that. So I watch it and I'm like, wow, okay. But I don't feel as bad because I have a friend who's a really famous musician, and he will re-listen to his songs because if he hasn't played them for like 3 or 4 years, he's forgotten it. And I'm not a musician, but we all forget things. And maybe the point of that is it's okay if you forget. That's why we review, and that's why we have all this stuff. All right, so moving on to Rodney over here. Do you guys like where we're going with this guy so far? A little bit better, kind of. Remember how he was so open? He was sort of lost in the doorway. Now we're like intense, and there he is. And he's this really deep thinker. I think he has 6 fireplaces in his home. He's the only photographer I know who lives like that. His study has hundreds of books, and very few of them are photography books. Fascinating guy. Look him up. Anyway, all right, so I go to the adjustment brush again, and this time I need to just drop that stuff out of there in the background. So I'm dropping my exposure way down and my shadows, and I'm going to bring my flow up. So I am kind of doing the opposite of what I did before. Before I was working delicately. Now I'm going to work fast. I want to turn on auto mask, and so I hit the A key down here because I don't want to get on his shirt, right? So I'm going to go there and get my auto mask going as I get near those edges. What I'm looking to do is to really have this simple, strong, poetic image. Sometimes what can happen is when you make these adjustments, like with the eyes, they're too strong. You get to this point, you realize, oh, I wish I could, scale something back. This one I think it's okay, but let's look at scaling here. I go back to the adjustment brush. The H key brings back my points. I click on one of these points where I've made an adjustment, and it has multiple sliders. Sometimes we'll have exposure, and we'll have shadows, and clarity, and contrast, or whatever it is. So let's just say we have a ton of adjustments in that area. And maybe this one. I'm going to do that with this one too. So I'm adding all this stuff. Anyway, point being is if you want to reduce something all at once, the best way to do that is to collapse the dialog, and that gives you your amount slider. What this does is it takes every slider relative to where it was, and it gets it closer to 0. So if you had negative clarity and positive exposure and you decrease your amount, both of those get closer to 0, if that makes sense. So if we do this with our amount, I'm just going to drop it down and go back here. Do you see how they're all near that area? And then when I go back to my amount, I'm going to crank those guys way up, and you can see how those are extreme in that way. This is phenomenal, especially because this is sort of like in Photoshop, a layer opacity. You do it too far. How do I take all that I've done and do it back rather than going each slider and blah, blah, blah. Great way to do it. The image doesn't look good, but hopefully the demo was good. All right, well, I hope you've learned at least one more thing, so I'm going to do my little question thing. If you're at home, I want you to write something down, or something maybe you need to look into. Maybe it's a photographer. You're like, yeah, I need to look into this guy, or maybe I need this tip. I didn't even know about the amount slider. I didn't know about the double K, or I didn't know about whatever it is, something that I've covered. I want to leave it to you and not wreck your little learning point. So here, 25 seconds in here. Take that time, talk to a neighbor. Neighbor, what'd you learn? Go for it.
And while they do that, Chris.
Can I ask you a question, though?
Yeah.
Did you learn anything?
Did I learn anything?
Yes. You're on the spot.
Absolutely. There are some photographers on your list that I'm very familiar with.
Okay.
And some that I'm not.
Okay,
so,
perfect.
Of course, Michael Kenna I'm very familiar with because of my name's Kenna.
Yes, of course.
But I did want to let everybody know that the K works in Camera Raw as well. Did you learn something, Chris?
I learned that.
I really, somebody in the chat rooms, Chris, teaches science.
Yeah.
And he said that this technique of stopping and having people, ask each other what they learned was really, really great and useful in the type of things he teaches too.
Yeah. And the great thing about it is that it's useful for teachers because you can get your thoughts, but then also in the classroom. Because I find in these classrooms, like, I try to find the little points afterwards, but they're gone. And so it's like trying to, grab them while you go.